Thank you everyone for coming at such short notice. We're very lucky to have with us tonight the Reverend Tim Costello. Thank you so much for being here. We will, I'm sure, enjoy a great conversation this evening. I just wanted to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land that we're meeting on today, the Gadigal people, and thank them for caring for this country, this coastline and our waterways since time immemorial. We are incredibly grateful to be sharing this land with them, and we also acknowledge and express sorrow for the cost of that sharing. So, as I said, we are incredibly lucky to have the Reverend Tim Costello with us tonight. He almost doesn't need an introduction, but I will give one anyway. For 13 years, Tim was the CEO of World Vision. He is now the Executive Director of MICA, which is an organisation that empowers Australian Christians to advocate on the most urgent global justice issues facing our world today: extreme poverty, rising conflict and climate change. Tim is also the Chief Advocate for the Alliance for Gambling Reform, that's correct. And Tim is one of our most respected community leaders and sought after voices on issues of social justice. And he's one of Australia's top 100 national living treasures, so we're very, very fortunate to have him with us tonight. I think we only put the message out last night, I'm not sure, but I see he's certainly got some pull power, so thank you for being here. We will, this is quite casual because it is a bit last minute, but we'll start on two issues that are very close to Tim's heart. I think we'll start with gambling, and I know, Tim, you've been involved as a really strong advocate for ending gambling harm since the early 1990s. Why is it such a passion for you?
Well, first, sorry.
Oh, it's not, sorry. Just push that on your
Firstly, let me thank you for welcoming me and for that introduction. It's pretty much as I wrote it, really. And let me just say, you know this, Sophie is an extraordinary local member and parliamentarian. So I didn't have any particular issue with gambling in 1992-93. I was the mayor of St Kilda. I was running a legal practice, and pokies had just been introduced to our state. You've had them in New South Wales since 1955. In fact, the only places in the world that had legal pokies was Las Vegas, run by the mafia, and Sydney. They were the two places that had pokies. They were illegal everywhere else. So you've had this long history. Well, indeed. That was even before Neville ran, 1955. And into my legal office walked a woman who was middle-aged, had 3 kids, happily married, had had a business, but lost it when pokies were introduced because she had started gambling and got addicted. And then she got another job and stole $60,000 from that job to feed her addiction, 1993. And she asked me to represent her legally. I went off to court, and I was pretty shocked that she was given 4 years jail. And I visited her at Tarrangower Women's Prison, and I remember thinking to myself, how does a woman who didn't smoke or drink, who'd never had a traffic fine, end up in prison for 4 years? Middle-aged, never been in trouble with the law. How is that possible? It led me to then write a book called Wannabet, Gambler's Luck Myth. And I started with the assumption that you'll still hear the gambling industry pump out. It's just in the Australian culture. It's as if we are baptised in eucalyptus oil at birth and a punt. And we'll bet on 2 flies up a wall, and of all cultures, we just love to gamble. That's what I believed when I started writing this book. And then I, in writing it, did the research, and I was shocked to discover that the Irish, the Chinese, the Kiwis, the English, the list goes on, all claim to be the greatest gamblers on earth. Oh, so it's not just an Australian cultural thing, that's in our DNA. So then the question in this book became, so how come we have the greatest losses from gambling when all the other cultures actually boast about being the greatest gamblers? I discovered that it was essentially the most failed, lax, weak public policy in Australia that explained this. I discovered that 75% of all the world's pokies in pubs and clubs are in Australia. 75%. Most of the pokies in the rest of the world are in casinos, which I don't have as much of a problem with, because the casino is destination gambling. You've got to get there, you've got to plan to get home. When they're on every fourth or fifth block, it's the profound accessibility that explains why we have the greatest losses in the world. Losses, by the way, that are 40% higher per head in Australia than the nation that comes second. We're not only the greatest losses, we are so far ahead in terms of the greatest losses, 40% to the nation that comes second. So I wrote that book because of that woman. She wouldn't mind me mentioning her name, Zlata Petrovic, who I represented and who went to jail. I started saying, how do we think about what has happened here? Essentially, what happened was pre the GST, which my brother introduced, the states were cash-strapped. The gambling industry literally came to state governments and said, boy, do we have a solution for you. Now, New South Wales had already found a solution since 1955. But other states like Victoria, we didn't have pokies until 1992. The gaming industry said, your state revenues will be overflowing if you just allow pokies to spread throughout all the pubs and clubs. Utterly lax, failed policy is how we got into this position. Back in that time, I was exchanging love messages in the media with the Premier Jeff Kennett. Kennett was praising the gambling industry, a gaming-led recovery. When he opened Crown Casino, he said, this casino represents the new spirit of Victoria. This casino is a beacon of hope. Literally, that's how captured state premiers have become by gambling. I sent Sophia an article today, Jeff Kennett in the Herald Sun, actually saying gambling's out of control. Saying we should be banning, the AFL should be banning all the TV ads. So there has been journey over time. Pokies is a state issue we'll come on to, where Sophie's been a magnificent advocate. Gambling ads, the Peter Murphy report, but that's in a nutshell how I got involved. Sophie?
Thank you. And we'll keep going on gambling. Let's just have a chat about the harms, because one is the loss of money. A huge amount of money is lost, $25 billion a year.
32 billion.
Oh, now, that's an old figure. Yeah, that's extraordinary, isn't it? And sadly...
More than aged care and the NDIS.
Sadly, when you talk to, the average people in the street, which I was doing when Jackie had her campaign, the by-election, talking to lots of people at the polling booths, talking to them about gambling. A lot of young men were coming up to me about gambling. And they said, we're just sitting around the pub the other night and we all sort of were chatting about how much we'd lost in gambling. They went around the table, each of them, every single one of these young men who were under the age of 30 had lost the equivalent of a deposit on a home. And that's high-functioning normal. So there is a whole lot of support out there for us to get this these reforms through. We'll talk a little bit more about this, the Murphy report and what was in that. So let's do that. Let's just move on to that. Or actually, no, let's start, first of all, with the harms of gambling, because we look at it as a public health problem, amongst other things. And then let's look at what could be the solutions in the Murphy report.
So I wish we looked at it as a public health solution. We don't. one of the recommendations in the Murphy report is to treat it as a public health issue. Gaming actually belongs with gaming and sport. And when I talk to state premiers in past years about gambling harm, they've always said, "Oh, you mean harm to the industry?" That's what they mean. So it's literally been put in sport and recreation, gambling. And we haven't treated it as a health problem, which is one of the Murphy report recommendations, and where you as a doctor have been such an important voice in Parliament. The harm is incredible. So what we know is that where there's gambling in a family, there's 3 times more domestic violence. Why did the Prime Minister's own rapid review of his expert panel domestic violence just in September last year come out and support a full ad ban of the Murphy report? So you don't get confused. Pokies, state jurisdiction. Federal, it's all the ads, gaming, online betting. The peer review said, and it shocked the Prime Minister, this is fueling, heterocharging literally our domestic violence. The second issue is financial debt. Financial counsellors all say the number one issue when a person comes is gambling. The third issue is suicides. No state government has ever done and will not do, even though we've been pushing them to do a review into the number of suicides from gambling. But we know there are at least 6 a day because the Alfred Hospital did its own in Victoria of admissions there of families, and we certainly know that the harm is profound for children. 85% of 10-year-olds know the odds on an NRL game and an AFL game. There's not really an 18-year-old alive today who doesn't think that NRL and AFL are brought to them by gambling companies. Grooming, normalising, mainstreaming. Now the industry's argument has been, well, it's legal. To which I say, well, tobacco's legal. We don't allow tobacco sponsorship. It took a long time to get it out of cricket and football, Benson and Hedges, but we said it's a legal adult product, but it should not be grooming the next generation. Alcohol's legal. You can't have alcohol ads on the 6 o'clock news, but you have gambling ads. You can't have alcohol ads until after 8:30, but you can have gambling ads. We know that it is absolutely handing our kids over to an adult product, and this is a profound failure by adults and public policy. We brought out research last week, so we knew a lot about the health, the suicides, I should add the crime. Our courts are clogged with gambling crime. Go to any court reporter and ask about the list, about why people for theft are in there. It'll be drugs and gambling. So, if you're having home burgs, and we know crime's a big issue, gambling with drugs is one of the biggest reasons for crime. Last week we brought out research because it's going to be a cost of living election, we're told. And Equity Economics did the research for us and found that gambling losses in households in Australia now are outstripping energy and gas bills. They're higher than energy and gas bills. The gambling losses rise because when you're in a cost of living crisis, it's counterintuitive, you actually gamble more. When you're feeling I can't pay my rent or my mortgage or the food bill, actually gambling becomes an irresistible force. And of course the ads are always there showing that people win and they're gambling with their mates, so it must be about community. The gambling industry owns it. The truth is that the harm is profoundly well documented, but neither the opposition nor the Prime Minister will even respond to the Murphy report that had 3 main recommendations. 1, to ban the ads phased in over 3 years, online and on free-to-air TV. We have 1 million ads a year on free-to-air TV. But it's gambling ads. 5 European nations have already banned all gambling ads. Britain, which still has them, has 14 gambling ads on free-to-air TV a week. We have 1 million a year, 900 a day on free-to-air TV. That's how out of control it is. We haven't been able to shift either of the major parties because the AFL, NRL and the broadcasters, 7, 9, 10 and Foxtel have said don't you dare bring in the Murphy Report. The second recommendation of the Murphy Report was a national regulator. So at the moment, the de facto regulator of all the gambling ads is the Northern Territory Racing Board. 6 men, all the betting companies set up in the Northern Territory where they pay very little tax, paid $5 million, which seemed like a lot to Northern Territory government for a licence. The tsunami of ads all come out of the Northern Territory, out of the licensed Northern Territory. The Northern Territory, wait for it, Racing Commission, that's the de facto regulator of the $32 billion of losses a year, is made up of people, 3 of whom are ex-gambling industry executives. It doesn't get more farcical. So the second recommendation was a national regulator. The third was move gambling from sport to treating it as a health issue. They are the recommendations.
And let's just have a chat about how far, well, you mentioned it a bit, but that inquiry, it was a parliamentary committee. It has people from Labor, Liberal, all parties, Greens, Independents, and there was unanimous support for these changes, and there was a real hope that something might happen. Maybe we'll just talk briefly about why it hasn't happened. You mentioned the 3 forces there, but why hasn't it happened? And should we, in that, be thinking about banning donations from gambling corporations?
The answer is yes. Absolutely we should. And it's both the donations, but even more, it's the cultural power of this vested interest. So just to say how normally we think about democracy. Normally in a democracy, when 80% of the public want a ban on ads, you say, well, of course, in a democracy, the politicians will follow. All the surveys have been showing 80% of 76% of AFL supporters, because the AFL supporters group have done their surveys, 76% of AFL supporters want the ads banned. So it is absolutely overwhelming, so wouldn't our political leaders follow? The answer is no. Why? Because of the extraordinary power and hold of vested interests. So it's the donations from the sports betting companies. Secondly, it is just the lock-on power of AFL and NRL. Why is Peter V'landys having an opening round last year and this year in Las Vegas? For only one reason, the gambling dollar. Who is the Prime Minister's best friend? Peter V'landys. It was so shocking to me when I met with the Prime Minister the day before the AFL Grand Final. He plays tennis, I do too. He told me how to hit that day. Shocking because, to be honest, I don't think he'd even read the Murphy Report. He'd been at a funeral, he'd spoken very movingly, even saying at her funeral, her legacy will be, this gambling report will be responding, and he refused to respond. In his meeting with me, he said, well, it's lotteries causing the damage. I said, that is Peter V'landys' lines. Oh, did Peter say that? Peter had said it just that week in the Sydney Morning Herald. His second line was, oh, well, the pokies don't advertise. I said, that's Peter V'landys' line. Oh, did Peter say that? I said, and by the way, pokies are on every 4th block. They don't have to advertise. Sportsbet, just one of the Northern Territory licensed foreign-owned, they're all basically foreign-owned betting companies. One figure, Bet365, have you heard of that? The CEO of Bet365, Denise Coates, pays herself £224 million a year. 220, the highest paid CEO by far. Sportsbet, just one of them, Irish owned. Sportsbet takes $2.2 billion out of Australia each year without one shop, one outlet, only through ads. It is all the ads. I'm telling the Prime Minister, when you say, pokies don't add, but that's a Peter V'landys line. The meeting ended like this. I said, Elbow, Prime Minister, he doesn't seem to mind me calling him Elbow. Elbow, I said, I play tennis too. I tell you what, I challenge you to a singles match. If I win, we do Peter Murphy. If you win, you can do Peter V'landys.
Come on, Tim, come on.
Elbow goes, well, I'm going to do an elbow. When I told, my alliance colleagues later, they said, what? Our years of campaigning rests on your tennis skills, Tim. It all comes down to that. But the answer to your question is political donations and this lock of powerful vested interests, which is why I've appealed to both Dutton and to the Prime Minister to say make it bipartisan, because then the broadcasters can't turn on you. They're terrified. Getting that proportion of the press offside, you can understand. But it is also just the lock that Peter V'landys particularly has on our Prime Minister. And if you saw when Rupert Murdoch came to town before Christmas, there in the room was Elbow, Peter Dutton, the former CEO of the AFL, Gil McLachlan, who now is the CEO of the TAB. You saw in the picture Andrew Abdo, CEO of the NRL, Peter V'landys, a couple of the sports betting CEOs. You suddenly realise they're all there to kiss the ring of Rupert Murdoch. That is the lock that we've got of vested interest, frustrating what 80% of the public want, and the Murphy report recommended.
It is quite overwhelming. I can feel my anger levels rising. Hopefully we have an opportunity in next term to really continue to work on this issue. So I think...
I might say, by the way, Sophie, only a minority government will see gambling reform.
Someone runs over like that.
And as Zoe Daniels said, the spine of politics today, hopefully, the independence. I might just add to that. We will move on, but just last thing, mandatory pre-commitments. Is that something... We need to ban advertising of all sorts. What about mandatory pre-commitments as well?
Yeah, so mandatory pre-commitment swings back to state jurisdiction. Back in 1999, I got up the first Productivity Commission inquiry into gambling. It was commissioned by the then Treasurer, who I happened to know rather well. That was the report that discovered overall we had 20% of the world's pokies, 75% in pubs and clubs. 35% of the world's pokies in pubs and clubs are in New South Wales. Number one, you literally are the belly of the beast. It's why I say, when the rest of the world, including Australia, looks at America, well, this is pre-last November the 5th, it might... Anyway, when we look at America, we go, it's unbelievable that they cannot reform gun laws. They have such a blind spot. When the rest of the world looks at Australia, they literally say, it's unbelievable, a blind spot around gambling. The 1999 Productivity Commission report recommended for pokies, because that was doing the damage, it was before online sports betting ads then, the mandatory pre-commitment card, the cashless card. Essentially, it means that before you're in front of that hypnotizing effect where you lose all track of time, where it's so deceitful, the minute you press the button on a pokey, you have lost in that nanosecond or one. What happens over the next 4 or 5 seconds is up comes 1 pyramid, 2 pyramids, 3 pyramids, 4. You just need the 5th. It hovers, and it's just below the line or just above the line. It's called a near miss. The whole point of that is to release the dopamine that hits the pleasure center of the brain with the force of cocaine. We've got the MRI brain scans, and our friend at the back, I've forgotten your name. Peter filmed Kachin, the Pokies Nation. And in that film, you'll see Massachusetts Institute of Technology and also Oxford doing the brain scans on people who are about to go and sit in front of a slot or a fruit or a pokey machine. Literally, what actually happens. So the 1999 Productivity Commission set a cashless card. Kevin Rudd rang me when he was in opposition pre-2007. What will I do on gambling? I said, reconvene the Productivity Commission. He did. Regrettably, its report came down 2010, just the day before Julia Gillard removed him as Prime Minister, so it sort of got buried. What did it recommend? The mandatory pre-commitment card, a cashless card. Dom Perrottet, this came as a surprise to me, but I built a very good relationship with him. He absolutely became convinced when I said to him, regulation has not kept up with gambling pokies losses. When it was feeding 2 shillings and a 1 armband, remember that? You couldn't do much damage. Then it went to cash operated. Here in New South Wales, you can load up $7,000 in one go of cash, in one go. It went from mechanical to digital, where the speed of the losses of pokies just became and continues horrendous. The cashless card says, before you're in front of the machine, you actually must, it's mandatory, set your losses. I can't afford tonight to lose more than $250. And then once you've hit that, you set the time you're locked out, 24 hours, 7 days. And that card Dom Perrottet ran on. He actually should have been smashed in that last state election, 12 years of Libs, 3 premiers. They actually forced Minns into a minority government, and the main reason was the public in New South Wales did want gambling reform. Yep. What's happened since is a faux ridiculous where Minns said we'll do a trial. The New South Wales clubs and AHA have absolutely gutted that trial. They're always going to do that. So it still remains the case that the reform is a cashless card, which again, other nations in the world have had for years, and it works. It allows you to gamble. It's illegal. If you want to go and play the pokies pub, you have to settle it. Crown Casino, by the way, because of the Royal Commission that found the most predatory pokies behaviour there, was ordered to institute the cashless card. Did in December. They're 25% down on pokies losses, which is a good thing. It's a great thing. So when Minns says, and New South Wales clubs, it's too difficult, clubs don't like it, the punters don't like it, Crown's already done it. So the technology's there, it's just the power of the industry here blocking it.
There we go. So we might, thanks Tim, we might move on to another subject, and that's international aid. Tim, you've just returned from Uganda. Could you give us a bit of a picture of what's happening over in Uganda as an example? What's it?
So there's a wonderful Lismore-based donor to World Vision who has built 4 hospitals since 2013 in northern Uganda. That's where the Lord's Resistance Army, if you remember Joseph Kony, ravaged for 20 years. Northern Uganda, so far behind the rest, 8 women a day were dying in childbirth. As Dr. Sophie will know, anywhere in the world, women in childbirth, 10% will have complications. If you've got the right treatment, your life and your baby will be spared. We had met women nurses with a torch in their mouth trying to deliver babies without a bed, without instruments, on dirt floors. So we built 4 hospitals. And we've gone back each year, and we went to Kenya this year where in a very remote, poor place they're building a 5th hospital. Just fantastic. Whilst there, Elon Musk smashed USAID. $40 billion pulled out. All of the US's aid giving gone. 40 billion. 40,000 health professionals when I was in Kenya were laid off. In the hospitals we visited, thanks to USAID, ARVs, that's the treatment for HIV positive people. And because these are maternity hospitals, any number of women who are pregnant, some who are positive, who with ARVs can deliver a baby that's not positive, being sent away because overnight ARVs are evaporated. TB and malaria treatments at USAID. The PEPFAR program, that was George W. Bush. Presidential Emergency Program for AIDS Relief. George W. Bush, we often don't associate this with Republicans, did far more for the world's poor than any Democrat president. PEPFAR saved 27 million lives in Africa. Smashed, gone. Literally, while we were there. I had a piece a week ago, 2 weeks ago in the Sydney Morning Herald about how cruel and savage this is. You know, Elon Musk, the richest man in the world, and Donald Trump, who campaigned and won, Trump never mentioned ever once he was going to completely withdraw all US aid from the world.
Can I just clarify all?
All gone. 40 billion. Now there's a review to say maybe in this area, but at the moment all gone. Rubio saying, oh well, they can look after themselves. It literally is a death sentence. It's a death sentence. Musk said to Joe Rogan that the fundamental weakness of Western civilization is empathy. Empathy has been weaponized. This is his justification. I would say the fundamental strength of Western civilization is empathy. That's what makes us human. And here is really evil going on. You know, a so-called pro-life party, well, they're pro-birth. You know, Trump has already forgiven people criminally charged to blocking access to pregnant women to abortion clinics. They have all had the charges dropped. So it is pro-birth, but it's not pro-life. It's absolutely not pro-life. And literally, Kenyan, Ugandan leaders, I was with the president of Kenya's advisor, and he said to me, we're a Christian nation. Trump said he was elected to protect Christians. He's been running off. How could he do this? It was the same response in Kenya. Good. What we are really fearful of is that with what will become not just a cost of living election, but it'll become a khaki election. And we do have to almost certainly, because America's proved such an unreliable partner, increase our defence spending. But our fear is, particularly the coalition, will grab it from aid. Australian aid, and we can pass around these, you can't often keep figures in your head, has already been absolutely smashed. Tony Abbott took $1 billion out of Australian aid in that Hockey Abbott 2014 budget. That dropped Australia in OECD countries in terms of giving and generosity. 31 OECD countries who give aid to the world's poor. Australia dropped to 28th out of 31 countries. That's our mean. Australia. The only nation of those countries that actually didn't go into recession too. The others didn't. Now, America will be last after Musk, but they were ahead of us, more generous. So Joe Hockey rang me a week before that 2014 budget. He said, Tim, I'm a World Vision donor. I just sort of been reading a magazine. I just want to ring you as out of the blue to say you're doing a magnificent job. That's when I really got worried. I knew this was another agenda. I found out on budget night $1 billion pulled out of aid. So we dropped from about 1.2% of our budget going on aid to 0.68% of our budget. We often used to talk of aid in gross national income. You know, the world promised governments would give 0.7%. Our aid was highest, by the way, under Bob Menzies. Aid was never a partisan issue. It was 0.5% of gross national income. Aid now is 0.19% of gross national income. I mean, it is. I'm really worried, particularly that the coalition are going to say we're going to pay for defence by smashing aid. Which is why we have our letter, which I think I've sent you, Sophie, signed by all church leaders, and I'm very proud of this. From Catholics to Pentecostals to Uniting to every brand, from the right-wing Australian Christian lobby to more left-wing Uniting Church, and the bookends of the whole Christian world, and politics is in the Christian world, as you know, as much as anywhere else, all united. Do not cut aid. Do not do what Trump is doing. And so we are doing meetings. We don't have to do it here because Sophie's completely on board, but with local members in Liberal and Labor areas actually saying, you might need to find more for defence, but when you cut aid, you're cutting our security in our region. Profoundly cutting our security in our region with our poor neighbours, with climate change that we have to address. It is a profound security area. As General Mattis, who was in Trump's first administration, said, where Trump was talking about cutting aid, Mattis said, if you cut aid, you're going to have to buy me a lot more bullets. Development, diplomacy and defence, actually development is the best way to ensure there isn't unrest and the ravages of climate change and hopelessness. Far better than bullets, far, far better. So that's really what this Safer World for All campaign, I've handed a few round, is on about at the moment.
Yes, so we need to, it's interesting that whole dynamic, cutting aid spending because we're worried about defence and security, but in actual fact is counterproductive. I just wanted to say a couple of things as well, is that we're on track for HIV to be eradicated in Australia by 2030. If we cut our aid to surrounding nations or to other nations, then that of course is going to go, AIDS is going to go, HIV is going to go through the roof. So that also has ramifications for Australia. The other thing I was really surprised about was I went on a couple of trips to our closest neighbour, Papua New Guinea. I wasn't actually aware that how bad the situation was for tuberculosis in that country. Something that you think is a 19th century, 18th century disease is rampant in that country with multi-resistant tuberculosis coming. They're our closest neighbour. They're 4 kilometres from Australia. It's a 30-minute flight to Cairns. So we really need to be thinking about how clever we are with our aid, because there's a lot of, we should be doing it for compassionate reasons, but of course there's many, many benefits at the same time.
Yeah, the benefits are absolutely spot on. You know, the truth is that we will move into our region if, with American aid now gone, and particularly if Dutton to bump up, it'll be a country still with an aid program. Do you know its name? China. Exactly. We literally will see, in geopolitical terms, profound threats if we cut aid again. PNG, great example, and I go up there a lot. You know, there's only 4 kilometres of sea between Australia and PNG, and I often think, what's the moral significance of that 4 kilometres? On one side, clean water, universal health, education, no TB to speak of. Across 4 kilometres of water. And none of those things of universal health and education are guaranteed. It's why aid is so important.
Anyway. We've got 15 minutes or so, 20 minutes or so. I thought I might open it up to the audience for questions. So think of your questions. But before we do, we spoke a little bit about the hung parliament. What are your thoughts on a hung parliament? There's a bit of scaremongering going on out there. Have you got thoughts on that, Tim?
Funnily enough, I do. I don't think you'd mind me saying this, but Father Frank Brennan, do you know that name? He texted me before Christmas. He said, all my life, I've said to young people and anyone I address, don't waste your vote on minority parties. Only a majority government is important and can deliver stability. He said, I've completely changed. I will never say that again. I totally agree with him. Look, apart from anything else, and not just because Sophie's sitting next to me here, the calibre of the Teals is so far ahead of the Labor and Liberal candidates. And when you want adults in a room who actually can think their way through the complexities and the challenge, you want the sort of calibre that we've got at the moment. And you want them, frankly, in a minority government. And we want them to be women, absolutely. On that, when people trash aid, in the last 10 years, aid has seen girls in school go from 40% to 80% around the world. When you trash aid, that's what you're trashing, girls' education.
And just talking about girls in education, that's one thing we need to be educating women and men and girls and boys. What does it mean? What is the outcome of educating more girls in terms of peace, development, all those types of things?
We know the figures. It's sort of humorous to put it this way, but educating girls is the best form of contraceptive that exists. A girl with an education has, on average, 3 or 4 less children in the poor country because she actually says, I have some other options. I can actually get education and start a business, and it's quite an incredible contraceptive just to have control of your life and have some dreams. We know that educating girls in terms of political change is the closest thing we have to a magic bullet in these unstable times. We all know, and I probably all offend the blokes here, but I'm talking against myself, that, blokes, we actually don't multitask, think in a labyrinthal way of the complexities, of the possibilities. I'm offended them already. But as my wife loves to say, behind every successful man stands a very surprised woman. It's our wives that know the truth. They always know the truth.
I want everyone to have a round of applause for Reverend Tim Costello.